when a Colorado rancher refused to lie under oath to save an innocent Apache youth. He had no idea that single act of courage would save his own life in the most mysterious way imaginable. Trapped alone during the worst winter in decades, injured, and facing death, Jacob Mills discovered he was being kept alive by silent guardians who moved like ghosts through the snow. What happened when these mysterious protectors finally revealed themselves will restore your faith in the power of honor and human decency. Hit that like button, subscribe for more incredible frontier stories, and ring that notification bell, because this tale of the Old West will leave you absolutely amazed. The courthouse in Silver Creek was packed tighter than a Sunday service, with every seat filled and men standing 3 deep along the walls. Jacob Mills sat in the witness chair, feeling the weight of 100 hostile stares boring into him like hot iron. Outside, the October wind rattled the windows, promising an early winter that would be harder than most. Judge Harrison Thompson leaned forward, his gray whiskers bristling with impatience. "Mr. Mills, you were asked a simple question. Did you or did you not see the defendant, this Apache? Boy called Running Fox, stealing cattle from your neighbor's ranch on the night of September 15th? Jacob looked across the crowded courtroom at the young Apache man sitting beside the court-appointed lawyer. Running Fox couldn't be more than 19, with the lean build of someone who'd grown up hard but honest. His dark eyes met Jacob's steadily, without plea or accusation. Just a quiet dignity that reminded Jacob of his own son, lost to fever 3 years past. The boy was innocent. Jacob knew it as surely as he knew his own name. The supposed witness was Carl Brennan, a man who'd been caught selling stolen army supplies just last year, but had somehow avoided prosecution. Brennan claimed he'd seen Running Fox with the missing cattle, but Jacob had been checking his own fence line that same night and hadn't seen hide nor hair of any Apache anywhere near the area. More importantly, Jacob knew the real thieves. He'd seen 3 white men driving cattle toward the territorial line just after midnight, men he recognized as part of Dutch Hansen's gang. But Dutch had friends in high places, and apparently someone had decided that blaming an Apache was easier than arresting white outlaws. "Mr. Mills?" Judge Thompson's voice was sharp with warning. "The court is waiting for your answer." Jacob could feel the tension in the room, like a loaded gun ready to fire. Half the men present wanted Running Fox hanged whether he was guilty or not, and the other half were too scared of Dutch Hansen to speak the truth. Testifying against the boy would be easy, popular, and safe. It would also be a lie. "Your Honor," Jacob said quietly, his voice carrying despite its softness, "I was asked if I saw Running Fox stealing cattle. The answer is no, I did not." The courtroom erupted. Men shouted accusations and threats, while Judge Thompson hammered his gavel for order. Through the chaos, Jacob saw a flicker of surprise and gratitude cross Running Fox's face before the young man's expression returned to stoic calm. "Order," Thompson bellowed. "Mr. Mills, are you certain of your testimony?" "I am, Your Honor. I saw no Apache that night, and I saw no cattle being stolen from the claimed location." It wasn't quite the whole truth, but it was all the truth Jacob could safely tell without signing his own death warrant. Dutch Hansen had killed men for less than what Jacob already knew. After the trial concluded with Running Fox's acquittal for lack of evidence, Jacob made his way through the angry crowd toward his wagon. Men he'd known for years looked at him with contempt and suspicion. "Mighty strange, Jake," called out Tom Brennan, Carl's brother. "Man might wonder where your loyalties lie." "With the truth," Jacob replied evenly, not breaking stride. "Truth has a way of changing depending on who's telling it," Tom shot back. "You might want to remember that come winter, when you're up there alone on that ranch of yours." The threat was clear enough. Jacob climbed onto his wagon and headed for home. knowing he'd made enemies who wouldn't forget or forgive. His ranch sat in a valley about 15 miles from town, bounded by pine forests and rocky outcroppings that provided natural windbreaks, but also perfect cover for anyone wanting to approach unseen. It was good land for cattle and horses, but it was also isolated. The nearest neighbor was 8 miles away. And come winter, the roads became impassable for weeks at a time. As Jacob unhitched his horses and settled them for the night, he found himself thinking about Running Fox and the quiet dignity the young man had shown throughout his ordeal. There had been something in the boy's eyes when their gazes met, not just gratitude, but a kind of recognition, as if he understood that Jacob's refusal to lie had cost him more than just popularity. That night, as Jacob sat by his fireplace, cleaning his rifle, he couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were watching him from the darkness beyond his windows. It wasn't an entirely unpleasant sensation, more like the awareness of a presence than the threat of danger, but it was unmistakable. When he stepped onto his porch to check his horses one last time before bed, Jacob could swear he heard the soft sound of unshod hoofbeats moving through the trees. But when he peered into the moonlit forest, he saw nothing but shadows and swaying branches. Probably just elk, he told himself, but some instinct suggested otherwise. 3 days later, the first snow began to fall, and Jacob Mills settled in for what promised to be the longest, loneliest winter of his life. He had no idea that he wouldn't be spending it alone. By November, the snow lay 3 feet deep across Jacob's valley, and the temperature hadn't risen above freezing in 2 weeks. What had started as an early winter was shaping up to be a brutal one, the kind old-timers talked about with reverence and fear. Jacob's routine had settled into the grinding rhythm of survival. Feed the animals, check for wolves, chop firewood, mend whatever the cold had broken overnight. His supplies were adequate, but not generous. He'd planned for a normal winter, not the Arctic siege that had descended on the Colorado Territory. It was while chopping wood behind his cabin that the accident happened. The axe blade glanced off a knot in the pine log and bit deep into Jacob's left leg, just above the knee. Blood immediately soaked through his wool pants, and the pain hit him like a physical blow. He dropped the axe and pressed both hands against the wound, trying to stem the bleeding while fighting off waves of dizziness. The cut was deep. He could feel it in the way the muscle wouldn't respond properly when he tried to put weight on the leg. With shaking hands, Jacob managed to tie his belt around his thigh as a tourniquet, then hobbled back to the cabin, leaving a trail of red drops in the snow. Inside, by lamplight, the wound looked even worse. The axe had cut through muscle and possibly nicked the bone. Jacob cleaned it as best he could with whiskey and hot water, then stitched it closed with needle and thread meant for mending harness leather. The pain was excruciating, but infection would be worse. For 3 days, Jacob lay in his bunk, fighting fever and trying to keep the wound clean. His leg swelled until he couldn't bend it, and the infection he'd feared began to set in despite his efforts. By the 4th day, he was too weak to tend his animals properly, and he began to face the possibility that he might not survive the winter. That's when the help began to appear. Jacob first noticed it when he dragged himself to the window to check on his horses. Fresh hay had been spread in their corral, and their water trough had been broken free of ice. Since Jacob hadn't been outside in 2 days, someone else had done the work. The next morning, he found a pile of split firewood stacked neatly beside his door, enough to last several days. The wood was cut to exactly the right length for his fireplace, and it was dry, seasoned pine that would burn clean and hot. Most mysteriously, hanging from a peg on his porch was a leather pouch containing herbs Jacob didn't recognize, but somehow knew were meant for his wound. When he brewed them into a tea and applied the resulting mixture to his leg, the infection began to subside within hours. Jacob never saw who was helping him. He tried staying awake through the night, watching from his window, but his mysterious benefactors moved like ghosts. Sometimes he would hear the soft scrape of a shovel clearing snow from his porch, or the quiet whinny of a horse being fed. But when he looked outside, he saw only tracks in the snow, the tracks of unshod horses and soft-soled boots. Apache tracks dot as the weeks passed and the winter deepened. The pattern of silent assistance continued. Jacob would wake to find his animals cared for, his water supply replenished, and small gifts left where he would find them. Dried meat when his own supplies ran low, warm fur mittens when his hands cracked from the cold, even fresh-killed rabbit, or venison when he was too weak to hunt for himself. Sometimes, in the pre-dawn darkness, Jacob would hear soft voices speaking in a language he didn't understand, but the tone was always careful and concerned, like family members discussing the care of a sick relative. The realization of who was helping him and why came gradually. These were running Fox's people, repaying Jacob's refusal to bear false witness with care that was keeping him alive. They moved through the winter landscape like spirits, invisible to his eyes but constant in their vigilance. "Why?" Jacob whispered to the empty cabin one night as he prepared another dose of the healing herbs. "I only told the truth." But even as he spoke the words, he understood. In a world where truth had become a rare commodity, where an Apache boy could be hanged for a white man's crime, Jacob's simple honesty had been an act of enormous courage and kindness. And courage, Jacob was learning, had a way of calling to courage. By January, his leg had healed enough for him to walk without limping, though he still tired easily. The infection was gone, thanks to the mysterious herbs, and he was beginning to put weight back on his frame. But more than his physical recovery, Jacob found himself changed in ways he couldn't quite articulate. The loneliness that had plagued him since his wife's death 5 years earlier was somehow less oppressive. Knowing that unseen guardians watched over him, that he was not truly alone in his isolated valley, gave him a sense of connection he hadn't felt in years. One morning in late January, Jacob woke to find something different beside his door. Not supplies or food, but a small carved figure of a horse, beautifully crafted from pine and stained dark with berry juice. It was clearly a gift rather than a necessity, a sign of respect and friendship rather than mere obligation. Jacob turned, the carving over in his hands, marveling at the skill that had created it. Someone had spent hours on this piece, carving each detail with love and care. It was, he realized, a message. The debt of honor had become something deeper, a bond of genuine affection and respect. That night, for the first time since the accident, Jacob felt strong enough to venture outside after dark. He built up his fire, put on his warmest coat, and stepped onto his porch. "I know you're out there," he called softly to the forest. "I know you've been taking care of me, and I want you to know how grateful I am." For a moment, there was only the whisper of wind through the pine trees. Then, from somewhere in the darkness, came a sound that made Jacob's heart leap with joy. The soft call of an owl, repeated 3 times. It was an acknowledgement, a sign that his words had been heard and understood. Standing there in the frozen night, surrounded by the vast silence of the Colorado wilderness, Jacob Mills felt more connected to the world around him than he had in years. The Apache guardians had saved more than his life. They had shown him what it meant to be part of a community that transcended race and culture, bound together by honor and mutual respect. The winter was far from over, but Jacob no longer feared it. He was under the protection of people who understood the true meaning of loyalty, and that was a warmth no blizzard could extinguish. February brought the worst blizzard in 20 years, a howling white fury that lasted 4 days and buried Jacob's valley under 6 feet of fresh snow. When it finally passed, leaving behind a world transformed into crystalline silence, Jacob ventured outside to assess the damage. His cabin had weathered the storm well, but the barn roof had partially collapsed under the weight of snow, and his corral fence was buried so deep only the tops of the posts were visible. Most concerning of all, his horses were nowhere to be seen. Jacob was struggling to dig a path to where he thought the barn door might be, when he heard the soft whinny of horses approaching through the deep snow. He looked up to see 4 riders emerging from the tree line, leading his missing animals behind them. The lead rider was a man of perhaps 50, with silver-streaked hair, braided with eagle feathers, and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Behind him rode 3 younger men, including one Jacob recognized with a start of surprise. Running Fox, the Apache youth he'd refused to testify against. The older man dismounted and approached, Jacob with the fluid grace of someone equally comfortable on foot or horseback. When he spoke, it was in clear, accented English. "I am Gray Eagle, father of Running Fox," he said with quiet dignity. "We have come to speak with you, Jacob Mills." "You're the ones who've been helping me," Jacob said. It wasn't a question. "We are. My son told me of your courage in the white man's court, how you spoke truth when lies would have been easier and safer." Jacob looked at Running Fox, who nodded respectfully but remained silent, clearly deferring to his father's authority. "You saved your son from hanging," Jacob said. "That was worth more than anything I've done." Gray Eagle's weathered face showed a hint of a smile. "You think we helped you only from gratitude, didn't you?" "Gratitude was the beginning, yes. But gratitude alone would not sustain what we have done. We have watched over you because we recognized in you something rare among your people, a man who values honor above advantage." Gray Eagle gestured to the devastation around them. "This storm would have killed you if you had faced it alone. Your animals would have died, your shelter would have failed, and you would have frozen before the snow stopped falling." Jacob looked around at his buried ranch and realized the truth of those words. Even now, with help, it would take days to dig out from the storm's aftermath. "Why reveal yourselves now?" Jacob asked. "Because the time for hiding is past," Gray Eagle replied. "Spring will come soon, and with it, new troubles for both our peoples. We need allies who can be trusted, and you have proven yourself to be such a man." "What kind of troubles?" Running Fox spoke for the first time, his young voice heavy with concern. "Dutch Hansen's gang has been raiding isolated ranches all winter, blaming the attacks on Apache raiders. 3 families have already been killed, and the territorial government is planning to send cavalry against our village in retaliation." Jacob felt his blood turn to ice water. "For crimes you didn't commit?" "Yes," Gray Eagle confirmed. "The same pattern that was used against my son in your white man's court, but on a larger scale." "What can I do?" "I'm just one man, and not a very popular one at that." Gray Eagle studied Jacob's face for a long moment. "You can bear witness to the truth, as you did before. But this time you will not stand alone." "What do you mean?" "We want you to come to our village, meet our elders, learn our ways, see that we are not the savages your people believe us to be. Then, when the cavalry comes, you can speak for us with the authority of someone who has lived among us." Jacob was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. "If I do this, if I go with you, there's no going back. The townspeople already think I'm an Indian sympathizer. This would confirm their worst suspicions." "Yes," Gray Eagle said simply. "It would also save innocent lives on both sides." Jacob looked around at his snow-buried ranch, thinking of all the reasons to say no. Then he thought of the mysterious guardians who had kept him alive through the hardest winter of his life, and of the young man who had faced possible hanging with quiet dignity. "When do we leave?" Running Fox smiled, the first time Jacob had seen genuine joy on the young man's face. "We will help you secure your ranch first," Gray Eagle said. Your animals will be safe in our village, and we will leave guards to watch your property. When this trouble is resolved, you can return if you choose. And if it's not resolved, then you will have a home with us for as long as you wish it. Over. The next 3 days, Jacob worked alongside his Apache rescuers to repair the storm damage and prepare his ranch for a potentially long absence. As they worked, he learned more about the people who had watched over him so carefully. Gray Eagle's band consisted of about 40 families who had been trying to live peacefully on a small reservation in the mountains, farming and hunting within the boundaries the government had assigned them. They had no desire for war, but they also refused to be blamed for crimes committed by white outlaws. We could fight, Gray Eagle explained as they repaired the barn roof together. Our warriors are skilled, and we know this land better than any cavalry unit. But fighting would only prove to your people that we are the savages they believe us to be. So you choose to trust me instead. We choose to trust the man who refused to lie when lying would have been profitable and safe. Such men are rare in any people. On the morning of the 4th day, Jacob loaded his essential belongings onto a pack horse and rode out of his valley in the company of his Apache guardians. As they climbed into the mountains, following trails he never would have found on his own, Jacob felt as if he were crossing more than just geographical boundaries. Behind him lay his old life, solitary, predictable, and increasingly meaningless. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the possibility of becoming part of something larger than himself. For the first time since his wife's death, Jacob Mills was moving toward hope instead of away from it. The Apache village nestled in a hidden valley high in the Rockies, protected by steep canyon walls and accessible only through narrow passes that could be easily defended. As Jacob rode into the settlement, he was struck by how different it was from his expectations. Instead of the primitive camp he'd imagined, he found a well-organized community of sturdy lodges and log cabins, with gardens prepared for spring planting and workshops, where people crafted everything from pottery to metalwork. Children played in the common areas, while adults went about their daily tasks with the quiet efficiency of a people who had learned to thrive despite adversity. Gray Eagle introduced Jacob to the village elders, men and women whose weathered faces spoke of wisdom earned through hardship and survival. To Jacob's surprise, several spoke excellent English, and all treated him with courtesy despite his status as an outsider. "We have heard of your courage from running Fox," said an elderly woman named White Dove, who seemed to command particular respect among the council. "To speak truth in the face of hatred requires great strength." "I just did what was right," Jacob replied. "Yes," White Dove said with a slight smile, "that is what makes it courage." Over the following weeks, Jacob lived among the Apache, learning their customs and contributing what skills he could to the community's welfare. His experience with horses proved particularly valuable, and he found himself working closely with the village's young men to break and train wild mustangs captured in the mountains. But it was the conversations around the evening fires that changed him most profoundly. Night after night, Jacob listened to stories of Apache history, philosophy, and culture that revealed a people far more complex and sophisticated than any newspaper account had suggested. "Your people fear us because they do not understand us," Gray Eagle explained one evening as they shared a meal of venison and wild vegetables. "They see our different ways and assume we are inferior, when in truth we simply value different things." "What do you value most?" Jacob asked. "Harmony," White Dove answered. "Between people, between families, between our people and the land that sustains us. Your people seem to value conquest of land, of resources, of other peoples. These are very different ways of seeing the world." Jacob was beginning to understand the depth of that difference when the crisis they'd been expecting finally arrived. A cavalry patrol of 30 Men rode into the valley on a cold March morning, led by a Captain Jacob recognized from his army. Days. Captain William Morrison was a competent soldier, but also a man who saw the world in stark terms of civilization versus savagery. Jacob stood with Gray Eagle and the other village leaders as Morrison approached under a flag of truce. "I'm looking for the leader of this band," Morrison announced, his hand resting on his pistol grip. "I am Gray Eagle. I speak for my people. Then you can explain why your warriors have been raiding white settlements all winter, killing innocent families and stealing livestock." "Because we have not done these things?" Gray Eagle replied calmly. "My people have remained on our reservation lands throughout the winter. I have witnesses who say otherwise." Jacob stepped forward. "Captain Morrison, I'm Jacob Mills. I think we served together briefly at Fort Collins." Morrison's eyes widened with recognition and suspicion. "Mills? What the hell are you doing here?" "Living with people who saved my life this winter. And I can tell you for certain that they had nothing to do with those raids." "You've been here all winter?" "Since February. These people took me in when I was injured and alone. They're not raiders, Captain. They're farmers and families trying to live in peace." Morrison's expression hardened. "So you're the one." "We heard there was a white man living with the hostiles, probably feeding them information about our settlements. The only information I have is that you're about to attack innocent people for crimes they didn't commit." "Jacob Mills," Morrison said formally, "I'm placing you under arrest for treason and conspiracy with hostile Indians." "On what evidence?" "Your presence here is evidence enough." Gray Eagle stepped between them. "Captain Morrison, Jacob Mills is under our protection. He has done nothing but speak truth and show kindness to people in need. Step aside, Indian." "I'm taking him with me." "No," Gray Eagle said quietly. "You are not." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. Morrison's hand moved to his gun, and Jacob could see Apache warriors positioning themselves around the village perimeter. One wrong move and this peaceful valley would become a battlefield. "Captain," Jacob said urgently, "before you start a war, let me ask you something. Have you actually investigated these raids? Have you looked for physical evidence of who committed them?" "I don't need to investigate. I have eyewitness testimony." "From whom?" Morrison hesitated, and Jacob pressed. His advantage. "Let me guess. Dutch Hansen's men? The same ones who tried to frame Running Fox for cattle theft." That's classified information." "It's not classified, Captain. It's corruption. Dutch Hansen has been using you and the Army to eliminate competition and witnesses to his crimes." For the first time, Morrison looked uncertain. "That's a serious accusation, Mills. It's a serious situation. How many of your witnesses have criminal records? How many are known associates of Dutch Hansen?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with doubts he'd been trying to suppress. Finally, he spoke. "Even if what you're saying is true, I have orders to bring in the leaders of this band for questioning." "Then question them," Jacob said. "But do it here, in front of witnesses, so there's no doubt about what's said. Let these people prove their innocence instead of assuming their guilt." What followed was 3 hours of careful interrogation, with Jacob serving as translator and mediator between two cultures that barely understood each other. Gradually, the truth emerged. Not only had the Apache band not committed any raids, they had actually been tracking the real perpetrators and had evidence that would lead to Dutch Hansen's arrest. "Why didn't you report this to the authorities?" Morrison asked Gray Eagle. "Because the authorities do not listen to Apache voices," Gray Eagle replied. "Until now, we had no white witness who would speak for us." Morrison looked at Jacob with new respect. "You've been gathering evidence?" "They've been gathering evidence," Jacob corrected. "I've just been learning to see the truth instead of believing convenient lies." By sunset, Morrison and his men were riding back toward town with Enough evidence to arrest Dutch Hansen and his entire gang. More importantly, they carried with them a new understanding of the Apache people and Jacob Mills's role in preventing a massacre. "You could come with us," Morrison offered as he prepared to leave. "Your name would be cleared, and you could return to your normal life." Jacob looked around at the village that had become his home, at the people who had saved his life and taught him new ways of seeing the world. "This is my normal life now, Captain, but thank you for the offer." As spring came to the mountain valley, Jacob Mills found himself part of a community that had accepted him not despite his differences, but because of his willingness to stand for truth when it mattered most. The silent guardians who had watched over him through the winter had become family, and the isolated rancher who had once lived alone with his bitterness had discovered that the greatest treasures in life were the bonds of honor and friendship that transcended all boundaries. When he finally returned to his ranch that summer, it was not as a lonely man seeking solitude, but as a bridge between two worlds, carrying with him the knowledge that courage and kindness could triumph over hatred and fear. The Apache people had kept him alive through the harshest winter of his life. In return, Jacob Mills had helped them survive the hatred of those who refused to see past their own prejudices. It was, he reflected as he watched Apache children play in his valley alongside the children of white settlers, exactly the kind of exchange that made life worth living.